Very good. Welcome back. You're watching Biz Check. We are live from Broadcasting House, and of course where critical conversations take place. We just had a conversation around the horticulture industry in Kenya. Now we want to shift gears and talk about the trade unions, not only here in Kenya but around the world. They have gone through phases, and now they're facing one of their worst challenges. People are being laid off. There's automation all over the place. Artificial intelligence is taking over workplace. And so what does this mean for the trade unions? This is the only platform where critical conversations take place. And so thank you for watching Biz Check. We are live from Broadcasting House. O'Brien Kimani is my name. Time now to get into our second conversation. And this is around the trade unions, the movements themselves. They have shaped the conversations around workplace and employment as well. But now the dynamics are changing because of technological advancement and, of course, the impact of COVID-19, whereby, for example, in 2020, we saw almost 2 million people losing their jobs because of shutdowns. And we just want to find out, how are they reorganizing themselves, the trade unions, and what does the future hold for trade unions? Well, joining us this morning is Dr. Evelyn Akech. She's the Regional Secretary for Public Services International. Thank you, Evelyn, for joining us.
Thank you.
And next to Evelyn, we have Kosgei Khalil. Yeah, that's right. He's the Deputy Secretary General for Kenya Electrical Trades and Allied Workers Union. That is Ketabu. Asante sana, Khalil, for joining us here. And we must make it clear. I mean, it is Khalil. It is Khalil. I mean, we are so much used to Khalil, but now this is Khalil. Yeah. So it is L-I-L. I got it right? Yeah. Fantastic. I first of all want to hear from Dr. Evelyn. What is the status of trade unions in Kenya?
Yeah, thank you so much. Just as you said, my name is Dr. Evelyn Akech. I represent Public Services International, which is a global trade union federation that brings together over 13 million workers who work within the public sector. We have affiliates in over 154 countries globally. Now, we mainly champion the issues of access of quality public services, trade union rights. We talk about issues of trade, tax justice, climate change, among others. Now, you note a very pertinent issue, the dynamics as a result of COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 exposed a number of challenges within the public health services. And it actually brought about the underfunding, which has plagued this sector for a long period of time. We noted that when many people got COVID-19, the first call in terms of where they're going to get help was actually public health services, health centers. And many countries, whether both global north and global south, were not able to manage COVID-19 because of lack of things like oxygen cylinders, the beds, among others, as a result of underfunding due to neoliberal policies since 1980s. We remember during 1980s and 1990s, there was introduction of structural adjustment program, whose main aim was to find a way of getting funds to help third world countries, in quotes, find a way in which they would actually cope up with development in tandem with their counterparts in the global north. And this led to many countries and many governments being told, do not put more funding into the public sector. Privatize your energy sector, privatize your health sector. And that meant that the government did not have a business in undertaking a business, which is actually not correct. We all appreciate the fact that the social services are the only means by which a government is able to redistribute wealth between the rich and the poor. But also it is a means of creating social justice across the communities within any country, whether global south or global north. Now, in terms of COVID-19, what are the things that actually exposed? One, it only amplified the importance of investing money in public services, including public health. We saw how many public health workers actually lost their lives. Many of the private facilities were turning away COVID patients, or sometimes the charges were quite exorbitant. Now, that brings me to the current crisis. We talk about climate change, we talk about energy crisis, among others. Now, as trade unions, both in the global north and global south, we are also cognizant of the fact that there is need to reduce the carbon emission in terms of transiting to a cleaner energy. But we're saying this transition should actually be just. and just how. We know that there's this narrative of providing green jobs. But in the process of providing green jobs, it means that if somebody is working in the fossil fuel, for instance, in an oil company or in an oil industry, you will need to actually stop working there and find alternative jobs. That is the implication. And if you're not able to find alternative jobs for these wananchi, what will happen to their families, what will happen to their community? At the same time, we know that in the process of a just transition, many workers will actually lose their jobs. However, that will not be the biggest challenge, because our hope is that every country should have a clear public plan in terms of if some of the workers are going to lose their jobs, what are the alternatives? Do we retrain them? Do we absorb them within the what we refer to as green jobs, among others? However, the greatest worry for many of the trade unions, both in the global north and global south, is the advent of bringing back structural adjustment programs in the name of green structural adjustments. What do you mean by green structural adjustments? This is where many of the Bretton Woods organizations, both IMF and World Bank, and some of the UN agencies, actually clamoring and pushing the narrative that we need to open the public space for the private actors to engineer the process of a just transition. But we know from a number of examples from both the global south and global north, and I'm going to concentrate on global south, every time you bring a privateer into public provision, one thing you're going to do is it will actually lead to the push towards the unit cost to the final consumer. So for instance, I want to give a good example of both Nigeria and Uganda, where we had instances where the electricity sector was actually privatized. When they privatized the electricity sector of Uganda in 2005, the unit cost of one unit cost for the power actually was pushed from 300 Uganda shillings to almost 1,000. That is triple in terms of the cost to the final consumer. But at the same time, you realize that when the privateers actually come, and that is the narrative they keep on giving to us as Africans, that they'll bring more private equity, among others. It is not correct. Most of these privateers, when they come in, they'll go to the World Bank, either in terms of IFC, who will give them the loans, and these loans must be guaranteed by our government using taxpayers' money.
Yeah, I'll be coming back to you because I want, I would also want us to reflect on the Amsterdam conference that was held in 2019 on the future of our public service.
Yes.
I'll be coming back to hear more about that and what we have managed to achieve so far. But I want to turn on to Khalil. As an industry, as trade unions, what would you say are the foremost challenges, that this industry is facing here in Kenya?
Thank you very much, Brian. I think one of my colleagues has articulated the overall objective that we normally focus on. As in Kenya, we have trade unions which are affiliated to Public Service International. This is, and these are trade unions which represent the sectors which provide public services. Public services in this essence is water, electricity, education, health. Those are the key, the ones which we normally focus. Why water? Is because you require water in each and every family every day. Yeah. Why electricity? You require affordable electricity, you require universal access, you require stable power throughout. So in this, so as trade unions within Kenya, those who are affiliated to the Public Service International, for me, with the Deputy General Secretary of GETAO. GETAO represent electricity subsector. Yeah. So our members are drawn from Kenya Power, KenGen, GDC, Ketraco, REREC, and independent power producers like Rabai Power, Watsila initially. We have Westmont, which closed before. So all this, including Thika Power and IBA Africa, all those are our members. And we advance as a union. We have been part of community advancing for universal access, and we really appreciate that there has been a lot of changes in Kenya in terms of reaching out to even the smallest villages and even having the power mix. But the only challenge which has been there, as articulated by my colleagues, is we are seeing the reemergence of desire to privatize electricity, for instance. And I'm sure you have seen from the website of Privatization Commission, you saw in papers the other day that we are now focusing to sell KenGen. Currently, the government owns the public, including yourself and myself, we own 70% of KenGen. But I think there is a drive towards reducing that shareholding to around 40%. So meaning that 60% will have gone to investors. But who are these investors who can be able to mobilize the funds to be able to do what is envisaged by the government? And what does that mean?
Well, if I can get you, I mean, clearly, because I'm privy to, you know, the conversations around this. It's a question of, you know, and this is something that Ash was raising, that, you know, most governments, you know, are very inefficient when it comes to running or managing businesses. And for you to turn around the management of institutions like, you know, KenGen, then there has been this push to ensure that the government offloads part of its shareholding in KenGen, in Kenya Power, in other institutions like Kenya Airways and so much. And that's why, you know, even on, was it on Tuesday, where the president, Ruto, said that in the next 10 years, there's a plan to offload government shareholding in about 10 companies. And so whether it's a good or it's a bad idea, I mean, it is not for, that is not what we're discussing here now.
So I think you have put it right, that yes, there could be some certain policy changes, but we need now to ask ourselves, what is the new paradigm shift which is affecting these sectors, which are more or less providing public services? One, as indicated, there is a reemergence of the 1990 clamor that we must have green structural adjustments in terms of moving to greener energy, in ensuring that we are reducing emissions. All these are good, but we need to ask ourselves, where that clamor is there, are we able to now, are we foreseeing challenges that can easily affect the public services in terms of pricing, affordability, and how is this going to be managed? Are we in that conversation? What is the alternative that can be offered by the trade union?
So tell me this, I mean, even when you look at, you know, a country like Kenya, you know, we're having challenges with, you know, job creations, and you have millions of people, you know, who are still jobless. And you have a situation whereby, you know, around the world, and this is a trend, you know, from the US, UK, Japan, the workforce is aging very fast, and you don't have a lot of replacement. So how is the trade unions in the world planning to counter this?
For trade unions, I think, although the workforce is aging, there is a precarious employment way where employers are taking people on contract. Either fixed term or mainly fixed term or casual terms. So as union, we need to fight. As unions, I think worldwide, we are trying to lobby through the ILO, which is the International Labour Organization, that we need to be able to link industry to the skills that we are going to get. We are acquiring the universities, TVETs and the rest, but there's still one critical area. How comes that most of the countries are retaining aging workforce? That is a question which needs to be addressed. Is it that we require reforms in pension? You see, sometimes you find countries are extending the working span of the people because they have done a projection about the pension payments that are going to be done. Then they require to retain people so that when they retire, they have a shorter span to be paid. But this question is going to affect the economies. So as trade unions, actually we are discussing it at length so that we can have a better way on how the succession planning or the organizational planning in terms of organizations or in terms of organizational planning can be done. And one of the areas is to reshape the skills that people are having. We must retool the sector so that they have appropriate skills which fits into the sector and addresses the question why aging workforce is being retained.
Look, and I want to hear this from Evelyn. You see, when you held that conference in Amsterdam, and I liked actually the theme, which was bringing back public service, you know, to the public service.
Reclaiming.
You're saying reclaiming. And we have seen a situation whereby, for example, here in Kenya, you know, the government has somehow shifted, or it had a policy shift when it comes to employment terms, whereby people are now being employed on contract. How is this impacting the public service unions?
Yeah, thank you so much. You raised a pertinent issue. Why would you talk about reclaiming public services? We know that each government has got a democratic contract with its citizens. I put into office, I give my taxes, that it should be able to provide for me those goods and services that at individual level I am not able to provide for myself. And that is the justification why we get people employed under the public sector, paid by taxpayers' money. For instance, for any economy to develop, first of all, you need to have a good healthcare system. And this cannot actually be provided purely by the private actors. Because as a privateer, my first aim is how much am I going to maximize in terms of profits. Now, you get a village woman, let's say maybe from Kakamega, who is not able to afford the services of some of the high-rise facilities. The best option she has is to actually go to a public hospital. But if these public hospitals are being understaffed, number two, they're being not given enough funding to be able to improve their facilities, where will they get that quality public service they actually need? So the issue of reclaiming public services, as articulated in Amsterdam, is that public services is the only opportunity for people to hold their government to account in terms of democracy. Number two, it is the only pure way that allows every citizen opportunity to have accessible, affordable, quality public services. Let's delink this. We are not talking about goods like luxury of vehicles, talk about diamonds. We are talking about what you and my mother needs down there in the village. Talk about good schools, talk about good health services, talk about accessible electricity. I need water. If you bring me as a privateer, the first thing I'm going to look in terms of my profit margin. I've invested, let's say, 50,000. I need a profit margin of, let's say, 20,000. So this 20,000 is going to cover it. For you as a consumer, you must be able to bear this. However, if I bring you on board as a government that I have a social contract with, you're going to look at how am I going to recover the cost, first of all, for the operation cost, and also to pay the public sector workers, but also contribute to the overall consolidated fund without looking at the profit margin. That is where the challenge comes in. If you bring in the privateers, then where is the social justice going to come in? And that is why we're sitting today here in Nairobi as unions from over 26 countries in the global south, plus comrades from global north. And from 36 unions, both affiliate unions and also global trade union federations. We're asking ourselves, at what point does privatization provide social justice? At what point does it actually provide equity? We're not talking about equality, because every human being has got a right to dignified living. I have a right to have electricity at a cost that I'm able to afford. Because let's ask ourselves a question. If a unit price of power is going to increase in Kenya, the question is, should I actually go for electricity, or I go for candle? Or should I go for paraffin? And what is the impact of paraffin in terms of the climate itself? So we must be able to look at the balance. Privatization is good. We talk about privatization, and you ask something which I want to respond to. Why are we having an aging workforce within the public sector? Read it. In 1990s, there were studies and measures that were actually imposed on Global South in terms of IMF to give the conditionality loan. They say, okay, if you want a conditionality loan to help you improve your development, then don't recruit. There was a recruitment ban which is still standing in so many of the countries to date. And that's why you cannot bring in new members, young blood, to ensure that we rejuvenate our economy. But it's also important, we are going to lose jobs. One of the social contracts of every government is to provide jobs. That's why people pay taxes, so that the government can provide jobs either through parastatal or mainstream public services. But if these jobs are not being provided because there is that caveat, do not employ new people, what happens? So in terms of reclaiming public services, we still believe the government has got a responsibility in terms of providing quality public energy. Okay? If the privateers want to come in through green structural adjustment program, for instance, let's talk about Kenya. You know the trend better than me. Why don't you allow them, we have maybe oils in Turkana, allow them do their own drilling, and then there's competition, so that they invest their money purely in that electricity sector, where we give them that opportunity. Then the government also does its own. Then the consumers got the opportunity to choose between either going for government or going for private. Because that is a choice that will need to be made. But if we impose on a citizen to actually choose from the privateer because of concessional loans, then you deny me the right to have access.
I want to hear this, Evelyn. What has been the impact on the trade unions, and especially more in the public service? Because of the hiring freeze that was imposed under the structural adjustment, or what we call the SAPs, and also the ongoing hiring freeze in government now because of fiscal challenges. What has been the impact? And of course, also remember that in 2010, I mean, we got into the devolved government, whereby counties became small government on their own.
Okay, the first challenge is that, one, there's work overload. And this can actually be seen practically from the health sector. You've heard during the COVID-19 how a number of health workers were actually being overworked, because where you're supposed to have about 6 nurses, you're only having something like about 2. So you actually need to work overload. And every time there's work overload, you cannot be efficient. Even machines reach a point and they break down if they're actually overloaded. Number 2, we are seeing an advent of creation of what referred to as precarious work and contract work, where there's lack of job security. We are sitting here today, if today as KCB you are only going to be hired for 1 year, and you're not sure about your tomorrow, what is going to be your dedication? How much development are you going to do in terms of building your capacity to be the best anchor man, maybe within not only KBC, but within the industry? Because every time you have a long-lasting contract, there's that commitment. You want to grow with that organization. But where there's contract work that you're only given about 3 years, you're not sure about tomorrow. So you're actually working about looking, okay, what is the alternative? So lack of job security has been introduced as a result of the freeze in terms of employment. But importantly, it is not only about the freeze in terms of employment, but also the funds that are allocated to public service has actually been reduced. And if there's a reduction in terms of the equipment, how do you expect me to perform as a worker? Then there's this narrative, the public service workers are inefficient. They're not performing to their ability. But I cannot perform if you do not give me the tools. I cannot perform if you do not fully motivate me. So the issues of freeze and also reduction of capital expenditure towards the public sector has actually led to that challenge. One, overworked staff. Number 2, precarious work that makes people not have job security. Number 3, creating this atmosphere that public sector workers are inefficient, which is not true. You made assertion that privateers come in because they make work efficient. It is not true. I want to do your research. If I'll get a company, let's say, for instance, from Germany, to come and run our facilities here, they'll use the local Kenyans to manage the same facility. We should ask ourselves, what makes the difference? They won't bring expertise in terms of the ones who are technical staff to run your power sector here, whether it is Kenjel. They'll use the same staff. The difference is this: they'll give them better wage. They look for better package for them, and that will motivate them to give more commitment. Okay? But at the same time, let's be honest, the money they'll bring is not their private equity. They'll go to IMF, World Bank, in terms of the IFC, borrow the money. That will be actually guaranteed by your taxes and my taxes.
But I also want to, counter your argument with the fact that, look, for example, when we used to have a KPTNC, the Kenya Post and Telecommunication Company, it was a behemoth, running so many things, from telephone lines to postal services. But a deliberate effort was made back in 1999 to try and privatize, the operations of KPTC. And that's how we ended up with companies like Safaricom, which has now become, one of the biggest companies in this country. Postal Corporation went its way, Telecom Kenya went its way. Of course, you're saying there are issues, of remuneration and, of course, motivation of staff. But and that's why you have trade unions, so that they can fight for the welfare of workers. How are you playing that role? But before we go there, before you respond to that question, I want to go to Khalid, because I can see you have a point.
Yes, I have a point. I wanted to respond about the former telecommunication.
KPTNC, yes, KPTC.
Where was Safaricom domiciled? Safaricom was a department within Kenya Postal Corporation. It was a department, an electronic department, a department which now...
Well, it was not Safaricom back then.
It was not Safaricom.
It was a department of mobile something.
Yes, mobile something. So, meaning, not that they could not have been able to build it within the bigger corporation. The hiving out was to have that speciality that they can be able to move on. But look at it, what happened when they unbundled that section now for mobile telephony, so that the rest would remain with landlines. There was a shift. The general innovation which was going on was that people wanted mobiles. Remember pager? Yeah, I'm sure you used to use it during your
Well,
time.
I was still young, but I know pagers.
You used to have pagers. So what happened to them? They are not there. But it was part of evolving technology.
Yeah.
So equally, for KPTC, it is something, if we were very clear to work it within or around it, maybe we would be still having the same, running both the landlines and running the mobile telephony part of it. So that is the challenge which, when we come to our level in developing countries, we tend to fall more on the international corporations which come and invest in this. Currently, who are the investors in Safaricom, for instance? That mobile telephone, let me use the mobile telephony part of it. It's either Vodacom, mainly, MTN, the major ones, the major in the world, and they are leveraging on the technology. So that would have...
Well, MTN is not part of it. It is Vodafone UK
Vodacom,
and Vodacom
so,
South Africa.
Meaning, it's something we would have still, as a country, build it and have it to have all the combination. If you go to the British Telecom, it still holds that, but you still have other private and regional mobile telephony companies. But they have still held it in their hands. So we are saying we only need to tweak some reforms and say, guys, this is the direction we are going to go.
But can we also say that, and sorry for stepping on your shoes, but we also have to agree that, the management of trade unions, and especially here in Kenya, has also been an issue in the past, whereby, to use a word that is now becoming more popular, where the operations of trade unions has been very opaque, and the politicization of trade unions is also becoming a big challenge, and so it is also proper to say that the management of trade unions, are also playing a role in the decline of trade unions in this country. How do we address that, Khalil?
Yeah, that is a fact. We need to have a change management within the trade unions. There is a paradigm shift worldwide that, as trade unions, over and above issues of bread and butter, we need also to have the bigger picture, the societal picture, which is going on now. I think there is a lot of transformation if you have looked at it. Part of it, let's say, for instance, Ketao. From 1998, we have been advocating for access to power, because what happens for that employee who works with Kenya Power, for instance, or Kengen or Ketraco? When he retires, you see the small village expects him to have power. So what do we need to do? So as unions, there has been that shift. We are shifting towards now being more involved in issues which extends beyond bread and butter. For instance, I'm sure you have seen the crisis in the education sector. Assuming, for instance, the university then sat down and say, we are having underfunding, can we have a discussion around this so that we maintain the universities to be there? For instance, sorry to use that example, Egerton, for instance. They would have sat down and say, yes, the cash flow that we are getting and the funding we are getting, there is delay. Can we continue with our programs with the small budgets that we have? As we sort out this, then we shall come back to pay. That is a commitment. And we, as Ketao, for instance, we had that commitment with Kenya Power some times back. We used to get low increments to cushion the normal COLA, not actually an increment. You get the COLA, the cost of living adjustment, which is the CPI. So, and we could compute and say, okay, fine, the CPI is 10, but what we can afford now is 5%. And we would move that way. So we expect the unions also, as I said, we are in that generation of trying to reform and ensure there is change management, so that we are able also to ask ourselves, how comes this and this is changing? But you also need to have an engagement with management so that they're able to appreciate that we need social dialogue over it. Even when there is a meet, there must be called a meeting. What do we need to improve in the studio? Do you think the lighting is okay? Do you think that the sounds are okay? If there is an upgrade, maybe the upgrade might not be immediate. It might be in phases. Can we upgrade the speakers first? Can we move to this other one? Can we also look at your welfare in terms of how you arrive here? So those are the issues that we need to have a discussion. But now we must have the buy-in also of the management, the government, and policy shift, that we need more of social dialogue. But the question sometimes arises is that how long will it take? Sometimes some things drags, because you cannot go up to a boardroom today and agree on an issue. So we need an open mind, that we need to have a discussion over issues. Some will have short term, we address it short term, some we address it in long term.
Dr. Evelyn, I want to hear from you. When you look at government, what will happen if all government operations, are privatized? If all government operations, are automated? What will become the future of public service?
The first question I'm going to ask: who is the government? And why do you have government in place? So if I put in place, you're working for KBC, and I give you a mandate as KBC management, and then you decide to relegate that mandate to another person, and we have a contract between me and you to be able to provide that, do we still have a contract? Because the role of the government, as I said, is first of all to bring economic stability and also ensure there's a distribution of resources. And that's why we always say that, taxation is not a quid pro quo. Okay? It is not something for something. We give it because we know we have a responsibility as the people to support the people we put in place to be able to provide for us those goods that will help us to have a better living, minimal standard. So what happens if we privatize? The government has lost its democratic responsibility towards its people. Because one, the social goods are not for profit. That is why we always go wrong. There are social goods which you cannot actually put a price tag on them because they help you. Whether I am from the lowest level of this community, I should be able to access quality public education. For me to also to climb in the status in the ladder of everybody else. So the moment you make education so expensive because you brought on board a privateer, you are creating a class economy. Privatization will simply lead to price society, to class society. I don't want to see that. And if you do that, I can assure you, the levels of crime will actually go up. Because one of the issues and the only leverage that the government has is that when you have unemployment or parastatal, it gives you opportunity to even do the regional balances. And also give opportunity to the people at the lowest level. Because they're able to see that. If you brought me as a privateer, I just want to see how much money am I going to make. Number two, I should pay you lower money to maximize profits. That is where a challenge comes in. You ask what is a trade union? A trade union, for instance, we're sitting in KBC. If I'm working together with you, you and me is the trade union. It is not a legal body. It is about two workers or three coming together and say, look here, we are offering our services, let's say, to Kenjel. We also just have a right to partake of the revenue they get. If there's been an increase in revenue, let's say by 50%, let them give us a share of maybe 5%, because we're the ones who contributed to that. Okay, I am going to climb those poles. I need to be protected. Can I be provided by protective gears? If I go as a one person to management, sometimes they're not listening to me. But if it is a problem that affects many of us within the organization, they'll be able to listen to us. So what is trade union? It's only 2 or 3 more workers coming together to demand and ask for what is rightfully theirs to enable them to work better and contribute more profitably to the organization.
And not all of them will go to that management. They will elect a spokesman. Automatically, among the 3, they will emerge a leader. And that is the leader. The rest of the 2 will empower and say, these are our issues. Even if you come here, you are the one to speak about it. But let's let's focus. We are having a focus on energy democracy. Trade union, energy democracy.
Trade union for
energy democracy. So for us, myself coming from now the energy sector, the bigger picture that we have is to ensure that the lowest level within the community gets electricity, get connected to the grid, either both the normal grid or the power or the other.
Not just getting connected, but getting connected for quality. And affordable,
yes, and reliable,
and reliable. Because you can have the lines constructed into your house. You have a meter, but you don't have power. You remember in 2001, we used to have load shedding.
The rationing.
Okay, now the continental they call load shedding. We used to have power rationing. Even if you have, how do you enjoy? So for us in the trade unions, the ones we are coming together are mainly drawn from electricity subsector or energy subsector, but eventually to come to electric power. So we are looking at, since electricity is an enabler in any community, in any economy, is there a way that as trade unions, we can be able to advocate for planning, for power planning, right from generation to transmission to distribution, and in this chain, there must be an aspect of affordability, must be there, the aspect of reinvestment by the government must be there, so that we don't look only at one component and forget that this is a supply chain. I want to pose this question to Evelyn, because I can see we're almost coming to the tail end of this conversation. When you meet with policymakers in the public space, like the Ministry of Labor, like the Public Service Commission,
what kind of conversation are you having with them in terms of, strengthening public workforce?
Thank you so much. First of all, you should realize that the appointments and even the workforce is a political decision and a policy issue. So when we meet as public sector workers, one thing we look at what policies are put in place and how are they going to actually impact on our workers. For instance, if you decide to privatize, let's say, electricity sector like we had in Nigeria, over 20,000 workers lost their jobs. 20,000. And in an African family, one worker actually feeds 9 people. So that is job loss equivalent to how many people? You can actually multiply that. That is almost over 180,000 plus. So every time we meet, we are asking ourselves, okay, if you brought on board, let's assume the private actors, what are the job losses that are going to be shed? How many jobs are going to be shed? What is going to be the impact in terms of our colleagues and our workers in that place? Then 2, if you brought them on board, because sometimes people think trade union is only about the workers and asking for pay. No. We live within a society. If you brought a privateer and they increase the power tariff, what will happen to another person? The prices will go up and accessibility and affordability issues will actually be curtailed. So when we talk in terms of public policy, we're looking at the policy you make should be in terms of people interests. We say, let's put people over profit. That is the main issue. As a government, your main focus, your main mandate is the people. Profit is actually at the periphery. It is not your focus as a government. So the policies which are put in place, one, should not be private-centered or profit-centered. They should be people-centered. Number 2, they should not make people to lose their jobs. Number 3, they should enable us to provide decent jobs in terms of minimum wage, in terms of protective gear, in terms of even the workload itself. So our call normally when we meet with the public policy makers is about every policy you are going to undertake will have a ripple effect, not only in terms of our workability, but also in terms of the total population. Because as workers, we belong to the community. I'm not going to pay a different unit of power because I work with Kenjel. We'll pay the same amount of money. So if it goes up, other than me losing my job, even your cost of living in terms of disposable income will be reduced as a result of an increase on that.
And maybe just to wrap up on that, O'Brien.
Yeah.
Even as we meet the policy makers, we want to make the processes as efficient as possible. You have seen that sometimes the challenge when people apply electricity, when people get birth certificate for their children. We also advocate that, is it possible that we can digitalize some of the process, and who are supposed to do that is the same employees that we are. We want to leverage on that so that we have efficiency also provided within the public services. If you go to the hospital, the doctors should be there. If you apply for electricity, you should be able to get water consistently. Yeah, and that's what we advocate as trade unions.
Just one wrapping word, Brian, if you permit.
There is no time, but I can only give you 10 seconds.
Okay, we're here as trade unions from Global South. We still insist the public pathway is the best way to ensure clean transition of energy.
Thank you.
Let the government take the lead, not private sector.
Asante sana. Well, Khalil and Dr. Evelyn Akech, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, the biggest challenge we always face is time, and time was not our end. And of course, this is a conversation that we need to continue having. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for joining us here.
Thank you too.
An interesting conversation here there on the future of trade unions, at a time when delegates from around 26 countries are meeting here in Nairobi for the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy Forum that is taking place here in Nairobi to try and see, how to democratize the energy subsector. Well, my name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you very much. You have been with us since 10 a.m. And of course, now coming up next is Tamurini with Harid. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.